Billionaire CEO was asleep in seat 11. When the captain asked if any combat pilots were on board, Jake Weston leaned back in the buttery leather seat of his Gulfstream G650, savoring the crisp notes of Dom Perignon on his tongue. At 35, he'd earned every luxurious detail of this moment, from the hand-stitched upholstery to the crystal stemware between his fingers. The cabin's soft lighting caught the bubbles in his glass, creating tiny constellations that reminded him of nights spent in the cockpit, back when the sky was his only companion. He checked his Patek Philippe watch. Still 3 hours until touchdown in Chicago. The merger meeting with Sterling Industries could wait. Right now, he wanted to appreciate this rare moment of peace. Running a Fortune 500 company meant that quiet moments like these were precious commodities. The flight attendant, Sarah, approached with practiced grace. "Would you like a refill, Mr. Weston?" "No, thank you." Jake smiled, his mind drifting to the upcoming presentation. The Sterling deal would secure thousands of jobs, something that mattered more to him than the billions it would add to his company's value. People always assumed his success had made him cold, calculating. They didn't understand that every decision he made considered the families depending on his leadership. Through the window, clouds stretched endlessly beneath the wing, painted golden by the setting sun. Jake closed his eyes, remembering simpler times when he wore Air Force blues instead of tailored suits. Sometimes he missed the straightforward nature of military life, the clear chain of command, the sense of purpose, the brotherhood. He pulled out his tablet, scanning through the merger documents one last time. The numbers were solid, but something about Sterling's recent market behavior nagged at him. Their stock had been unusually volatile lately, and their CEO, Marcus Sterling, had been dodging his calls. Sarah appeared again, this time with fresh, warm towels. "We're expecting some light chop ahead, Mr. Weston. The captain suggests keeping your seatbelt fastened." Jake nodded, securing the belt across his lap without looking up from his tablet. The slight bumping started gradually. Nothing unusual for early evening flights over the Midwest. He'd experienced far worse during his combat tours. The cabin lights flickered once, twice. Jake's glass trembled against its coaster, the champagne rippling in concentric circles. The turbulence increased sharply, forcing him to grab his tablet before it slid off the table. A violent jolt rocked the aircraft. The remaining champagne in Jake's glass sloshed over the rim, spreading across his crisp white shirt. Sarah stumbled, catching herself on an empty seat as the plane lurched again, more severely this time. The overhead bins rattled ominously. Warning lights flashed through the cabin. This wasn't normal turbulence. Jake's military instincts kicked in, recognizing the distinct difference between weather-related roughness and something more sinister. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of the usual reassuring tone, the captain's voice carried an edge Jake hadn't heard since his combat days. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." There was a pause, followed by words that made Jake's blood run cold. "Is there anyone on board with combat pilot experience?" Jake's fingers tightened on his armrest, his mind already racing through emergency protocols and procedures. The champagne stain spread across his shirt, forgotten, as years of training surged to the surface. The peaceful CEO vanished, replaced by the combat pilot who had navigated through countless crisis situations. The plane bucked again, and this time, the drop was steep enough to make his stomach lurch. Emergency oxygen masks dropped from their compartments, swaying like macabre puppets in the increasingly chaotic cabin. Sarah gripped the nearest seat, her professional composure cracking as she met Jake's eyes, silently pleading for help. In that moment, Jake knew his carefully constructed world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals was about to collide with the past he'd left behind. The question wasn't whether to answer the captain's call. It was how bad the situation had to be for such a request to be made in the first place. Jake's muscles tensed at the captain's words, his military training kicking in automatically. The plane shuddered again, and the overhead bins creaked ominously. Around him, passengers clutched their armrests, their knuckles white with fear. A child started crying somewhere in the back of the cabin. "Mr. Weston?" Sarah steadied herself against a seat, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Are you—" He nodded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Former Air Force combat pilot." The words felt strange on his tongue. It had been years since he'd acknowledged that part of his past. Standing carefully against the turbulence, Jake's mind switched to assessment mode, analyzing every shake and shudder of the aircraft. The vibrations weren't normal. After thousands of hours in the cockpit, he knew the difference between standard turbulence and something more sinister. This felt wrong, too rhythmic, too consistent. His combat instincts, dormant for years beneath expensive suits and boardroom strategies, screamed that something was very wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake raised his voice to be heard over the growing panic, "please remain calm and in your seats." His tone carried the authority of both a CEO and a military officer. Several passengers visibly relaxed at his confident demeanor. Making his way forward wasn't easy. The plane bucked and swayed, forcing him to grab seat backs for balance. The usually smooth carpet of his private jet now felt like treacherous terrain. Jake's expensive Italian shoes, perfect for corporate boardrooms, slipped slightly with each step. Sarah followed close behind. "The cockpit is just ahead, Mr. Weston. The captain, he's never asked for help before." That fact wasn't lost on Jake. Captain Matthews was one of the most experienced pilots in his company's fleet. If he was calling for combat experience, the situation was dire. Jake's mind ran through possible scenarios: engine failure, system malfunction, or something worse. The plane dropped suddenly, eliciting screams from the passengers. Jake grabbed the wall, his shoulder muscles tensing as he held himself steady. The lights flickered again, casting strange shadows through the cabin. In that moment, he wasn't Jake Weston, Billionaire CEO. He was Captain Weston, ready to face whatever crisis awaited in the cockpit. Sarah input the security code with shaking hands, and the cockpit door clicked open. Jake stepped through, his eyes taking a moment to adjust to the different lighting. The cockpit was alive with flashing warning lights and the steady beep of multiple alarms. "I'm Jake Weston, former Air Force—" The words died in his throat. Time seemed to freeze. Sitting in the co-pilot's seat was a face he hadn't seen in 12 years, but one he'd never truly forgotten. Emily Harper. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a neat bun, but he'd recognize those determined green eyes anywhere. They were the same eyes that had once looked at him with love, then later with hurt and disappointment. Emily's hand stilled on the controls for just a fraction of a second. He saw the recognition flash across her face, followed quickly by shock. Then something else. Something that looked like old pain mixed with professional determination. She tried to mask her reaction, but Jake knew her too well. Even after all these years, he could read the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slight widening of her eyes. Their gazes locked, and suddenly the cockpit felt too small, too confined for the weight of their shared history. The air grew thick with unspoken words and buried memories. 12 years of silence stretched between them like an invisible wall, even as alarms continued to blare around them. Emily recovered first, her professional training taking over. She turned back to the controls, but Jake caught the slight tremor in her hands. The woman who had once known him better than anyone, who had shared his dreams of flying and his early struggles, was now sitting in his plane's cockpit during what appeared to be a serious crisis. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Of all the planes in all the world, she had to be on his, at this moment, when everything seemed to be going wrong. The cockpit's warning lights cast an eerie red glow across Emily's face as she turned back to the instruments. "Mr. Weston," she said formally, her voice steady despite the situation. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Likewise, Miss Harper." Jake moved closer to the control panel, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You always were the best pilot in our class." Captain Matthews interrupted their tense reunion. "Save the catch-up for later. We've got serious problems here." His weathered hands gripped the controls tightly as another wave of turbulence hit. "The plane's not responding normally to inputs. We've lost partial control of the stabilizers, and the backup systems are giving us conflicting readings." Jake leaned over the instrument panel, his expensive suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. "What were the first indicators?" "Started about 20 minutes ago," Emily explained, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. "Small vibrations at first, then escalating. The odd thing is—" "The pattern," Jake finished, their old synchronicity emerging despite the years apart. "It's too regular for natural turbulence." Emily nodded, a flicker of their old connection passing between them. "Exactly. And look at these readings." She pointed to a display showing various flight parameters. "The primary and secondary systems are showing different numbers. That shouldn't be possible with the redundancies built in." Captain Matthews wiped sweat from his forehead. "I've never seen anything like it in 30 years of flying. That's why I called for combat experience. We need someone who's dealt with unexpected situations, systems failures under pressure." The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Jake grabbed the back of Emily's seat to steady himself, accidentally brushing her shoulder. She tensed at the contact, but neither acknowledged it. "Emily," Captain Matthews said, "let Mr. Weston take the co-pilot position. With your combined experience, we might have a chance at figuring this out." Emily's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Of course, Captain." She started to stand, but Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. "No, you stay. You're more familiar with this aircraft's systems." He moved to the jump seat behind them, leaning forward to see the instruments. "Talk me through what you've tried so far." As Emily detailed their attempts to stabilize the aircraft, Jake couldn't help but notice how confident and capable she'd become. The nervous flight student he'd known had transformed into a consummate professional. Her voice remained calm as she explained the situation, though he caught the slight strain in it that only someone who knew her well would notice. "The manual overrides aren't responding," she concluded, fighting the controls as another shudder ran through the plane. "And we're getting intermittent power fluctuations in the avionics." Jake studied the instrument panel, his combat training kicking in. "Permission to access the backup controls, Captain?" Captain Matthews nodded grimly. "Granted. Emily, give him access to your station." Emily's fingers flew across the keypad, authorizing Jake's access. As he reached around her to take the co-pilot's controls, their hands brushed briefly. The familiar spark was still there, making them both pause for a fraction of a second. "Ready?" Emily asked, her voice professional but softer than before. "Ready," Jake confirmed, "just like the old days in the simulator." "Except this time it's real," she reminded him, but there was a hint of their old rapport in her tone. Together they began working the controls, falling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural despite their years apart. Jake's combat experience complemented Emily's intimate knowledge of the aircraft's systems. When she compensated for a sudden roll, he was already adjusting the thrust to help stabilize them. When he noticed a pattern in the system's behavior, she immediately understood his quick gesture toward the relevant display. They moved like dancers performing a familiar routine, anticipating each other's actions, communicating with brief glances and short nods. The tension between them transformed into something productive, a focused energy that made them more effective as a team. Captain Matthews watched their seamless cooperation with approval. "Whatever happened between you two," he said, "it clearly didn't affect your ability to work together." Neither Jake nor Emily responded to his comment. Both concentrated on the task at hand. But something had shifted in the cockpit's atmosphere. Despite the danger, despite their complicated history, they had found their old rhythm. It was both comforting and unsettling how easily they fell back into sync, as if the years apart had never happened. The violent shaking of the aircraft gradually eased, though occasional tremors still rippled through the fuselage. Jake's shoulders remained tense as he studied the instrument panel, his years of combat experience telling him something wasn't right. The readings didn't match typical turbulence patterns he'd encountered before. "Emily," he said, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Look at the stabilizer inputs." He pointed to a series of numbers scrolling across one of the screens. Emily leaned closer, her perfume bringing back memories of late-night study sessions in college. She frowned, her expertise in aviation systems evident in her quick analysis. "The oscillation pattern is too regular," she murmured. "Natural turbulence should show more randomization in the feedback loop." "Exactly what I was thinking." Jake pulled up another screen, his fingers moving swiftly across the controls. "And look at these system logs. The primary control surface responses are delayed by milliseconds compared to the input commands." Captain Matthews turned to them, his face etched with concern. "What are you two seeing?" Emily straightened in her seat, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Captain, we need to run a full diagnostic on the flight control systems. These patterns—" She glanced at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "They're not consistent with atmospheric disturbance." "Running diagnostic now," Jake said, initiating the sequence. The screen filled with lines of data, scrolling faster than most could read, but both Jake and Emily's eyes tracked the information with practiced ease. Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard, diving deeper into the system architecture. "Jake, check the redundancy protocols. Something's off with the backup systems." Working in tandem, they delved into the plane's complex systems. Their shared background made communication effortless. A raised eyebrow here, a subtle gesture there. Despite their personal history, their professional rapport remained unchanged. "There," Emily said suddenly, her voice sharp. "Look at the authentication logs." Jake leaned forward, his chest tightening as he processed what he was seeing. "Multiple unauthorized access attempts in the past hour. Someone's been trying to override the security protocols." Emily pulled up another screen, her movements quick but precise. "The system firewalls have been compromised. These logs show external commands being inserted into the flight control algorithms." "In English, please," Captain Matthews interrupted, his knuckles white on the controls. Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emily remembered from their college days when he was particularly stressed. "Someone's hacked into the plane's systems, Captain. The turbulence we're experiencing, it's not natural. Someone's manipulating the control surfaces remotely." Emily's fingers continued to move across the keyboard, uncovering more evidence. "The attack signatures are sophisticated. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They managed to bypass multiple security layers without triggering any alarms." Jake felt his pulse quicken as the implications sank in. This wasn't a random technical malfunction or bad weather. This was deliberate. Someone wanted this plane to experience problems, and given that it was his private jet, the intrusion had to come from inside the plane, Emily said quietly, confirming his fears. "These systems are isolated from external networks during flight. Whoever did this is on board with us." Jake's gaze swept towards the cabin door, his mind racing through the passenger list. His security team had vetted everyone, hadn't they? But someone had slipped through. Someone who wanted to cause harm. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just responsible for his own safety anymore. Everyone on this plane was in danger because of him. His eyes met Emily's, and he saw his own concern reflected in her expression. The professional distance they'd been maintaining cracked slightly as the gravity of their situation became clear. A soft beep from the console drew their attention. Emily's face paled as she pulled up new data. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "look at this. The tampering. It's not just in one system. They've compromised everything. Navigation, communications, environmental controls. This isn't just an attack on the flight controls. Someone's trying to take down the entire aircraft." Jake leaned closer to the control panel, his shoulder brushing against Emily's, as they both studied the scrolling data. The familiar scent of her shampoo momentarily distracted him, bringing back memories he'd tried hard to forget. But now wasn't the time for reminiscing. Lives were at stake. "These interference patterns are too precise," Emily muttered, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Someone knew exactly what they were targeting." Jake nodded, watching as she pulled up another diagnostic screen. "Can you trace the source?" "I'm trying, but—" Emily stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing. She reached forward, running her hand along the underside of the control panel. "There's something here that shouldn't be." Captain Matthews kept his hands steady on the controls, but turned his head slightly. "What do you mean?" Emily's fingers found what she was looking for, a small ridge that didn't match the smooth surface of the panel. "Jake, hand me that flashlight." He grabbed the small flashlight from the emergency kit and passed it to her. Emily bent down, shining the light into the narrow space beneath the controls. Her sharp intake of breath told Jake she'd found something significant. "There's a device attached to the main control board," she said, her voice tight with concern. "It's about the size of a credit card, with what looks like a wireless transmitter." Jake's military training kicked in. "Don't touch it. It could be rigged." "I wasn't planning to," Emily replied, her professional tone carrying a hint of their old familiarity. "But this explains the system anomalies. Someone physically planted this device to override the controls." Jake felt his stomach tighten. "Which means whoever did this had access to the plane before takeoff. And probably still has access to the device now," Emily added, straightening up. She pulled up a new screen showing the plane's internal network activity. "Look at these transmission patterns. The device is receiving signals, active commands being sent from somewhere inside the plane." The implications hit Jake hard. Someone on his private jet, someone who had passed security clearance, was actively trying to bring them down. His mind raced through the passenger manifest, his personal assistant, 2 security team members, 3 executives from his company, and a representative from the investment firm he was meeting with. "We need to find out who's sending those signals," Jake said, keeping his voice low. "Can you trace the transmission source?" Emily was already working on it, her expertise evident in the way she navigated through the complex systems. "The signals being bounced around the plane's internal network. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing." She paused, studying a new set of data. "But there's something else. These command sequences, they're familiar." "Familiar how?" "They're similar to proprietary protocols I've seen before, in high-end corporate security systems." Emily gave him a meaningful look. "The kind your company specializes in." Jake felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. West Tech, his company, had developed some of the most sophisticated cybersecurity systems in the world. If these protocols were similar, "Someone from inside my company," he said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "Someone who knows our systems." Emily nodded grimly. "And they're using that knowledge to try to bring down this plane." The plane shuddered again, reminding them of the immediate danger they were in. Captain Matthews adjusted the controls, fighting to maintain stability. "We need to find out who's behind this," Jake said, his mind already sorting through possibilities. Which of his executives had the technical knowledge to pull this off? Who had access to the company's proprietary protocols? And more importantly, why? "We don't have much time," Emily warned, pointing to a warning light that had just started flashing. "These system overrides are getting more aggressive. If we don't stop them soon—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake knew exactly what was at stake. Someone from his own company, someone he had trusted, was trying to kill everyone on board, and they had to figure out who it was before it was too late. The rhythmic hum of the engines filled the tense silence as Jake and Emily worked side by side in the cockpit. Captain Matthews had stepped out briefly to check on the passengers, leaving them alone with their thoughts and the weight of their discovery. Emily's fingers moved expertly across the control panel, her movements precise and confident. Jake couldn't help but notice how different she seemed from the uncertain college student he'd known years ago. "So," Jake ventured, keeping his voice casual while monitoring the altitude readings, "how long have you been flying?" Emily glanced at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. 8 years now. Started with commercial airlines, worked my way up to specialized aviation consulting." She paused, checking a gauge. "I help airlines improve their safety protocols and train their crews." "That's impressive," Jake said, genuinely amazed. "You've really made a name for yourself in the industry." "I could say the same about you," Emily replied, her tone carefully neutral. "Westech is everywhere these days. The media calls you the boy wonder of the tech world." Jake felt a familiar discomfort at the mention of his public image. "The media likes their narratives. But you know how it really started. Those long nights in the engineering lab, dreaming up impossible ideas." "I remember," Emily said softly. The words hung between them, heavy with shared memories. They worked in silence for a few moments, both acutely aware of the unspoken history between them. Jake watched as Emily expertly navigated through complex diagnostic screens, her confidence evident in every movement. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I never would have guessed you'd end up in aviation. Back then you were all set for that position at Goldman Sachs." Emily's hands stilled for a moment. "Life takes unexpected turns, doesn't it?" She took a deep breath before continuing. "That prestigious finance career everyone expected me to pursue, it just wasn't me. I realized I needed something more. Meaningful." Jake remembered the arguments they'd had about her career choice. He'd been so focused on success, on proving himself, that he couldn't understand why she'd walk away from such an opportunity. "What made you choose aviation?" he asked, genuinely curious now. "Remember that flight we took to visit my grandmother?" Emily's voice softened with the memory. "The one where we hit that terrible storm?" Jake nodded. How could he forget? They'd been terrified. The way the crew handled it, so calm, so professional. They saved lives that day, Jake. That's when I knew I wanted to do something that really mattered. She paused, checking another reading. Of course, not everyone understood that decision. The implied criticism wasn't lost on Jake. He'd been one of those people who hadn't understood, too wrapped up in his own ambitions to see the value in hers. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly, "about a lot of things back then." Emily's hands stilled again, but she didn't look at him. "We both made our choices, Jake. You chose your path, I chose mine." "And look where those choices led us," Jake said, gesturing to their current situation. "You're literally saving lives, just like you wanted." A small smile crossed Emily's face, but it held a touch of sadness. "And you're a billionaire CEO, exactly what you always wanted to be." The words weren't meant as an accusation, but Jake felt their weight nonetheless. He remembered their last fight, how he'd told her she was throwing away her future. Now, Seeing her in her element, he realized how short-sighted he'd been. I was too focused on success, he admitted. On proving myself, I couldn't see that there were different ways to make a difference in the world. Emily finally turned to look at him, her eyes meeting his. We were young, Jake. We both had a lot of growing up to do. The moment stretched between them, filled with regret and possibility. Jake could see now what he couldn't see then, the strength of her convictions, the courage it had taken to follow her heart instead of others' expectations. Captain Matthews's return to the cockpit broke the moment, but the air between them had shifted. As they turned their attention back to the crisis at hand, Jake couldn't help but wonder how different things might have been if he'd supported her dreams instead of dismissing them. Jake's phone vibrated in his pocket, breaking the tense atmosphere in the cockpit. He glanced at Emily, who nodded her permission for him to take the call. The caller ID showed Marcus Chen, his head of security at Westtech. Marcus, what have you found? Jake kept his voice low, moving slightly away from Emily. Sir, we've detected something concerning. Marcus's usually steady voice carried an edge of worry. Someone from within the company accessed the flight manifest and detailed specifications of your private jet last week. They used authorized credentials. Jake's stomach tightened. Who? That's the thing, sir. The access came from executive-level credentials, but they were routed through multiple servers. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. Jake ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing through possibilities. Send me the list of everyone with that level of access. Emily watched him intently as he ended the call. Bad news? Someone from my company accessed confidential details about this flight, Jake said, showing her his phone as the list came through. Executive-level clearance only. Emily leaned in, her shoulder brushing against his as she studied the names. How many people are we talking about? 15, Jake replied, scrolling through the list. All senior executives and board members. He paused at a particular name. Richard Kendrick, his biggest rival for the CEO position 3 years ago. Emily noticed his hesitation. Someone you suspect? Richard Kendrick, Jake said, his voice tight. He was next in line for CEO before the board chose me. He's been difficult ever since. Difficult how? Emily asked, adjusting a control setting while maintaining eye contact. Undermining my decisions in board meetings, questioning my leadership. Jake frowned. But sabotage? That seems extreme, even for him. Sometimes people surprise you, Emily said quietly, and not always in good ways. Jake continued scanning the list, each name carrying its own weight of possibility. Sarah Martinez, my CFO. She's been pushing for more control over international operations. James Wilson, head of R&D. He was furious when I canceled his pet project last month. Emily pointed to another name. Catherine Chen? Any relation to your security chief? His sister. She's our head of legal. Jake shook his head. I trust Catherine implicitly. She's been with the company since before I took over. Trust can make us blind sometimes, Emily said gently. We need to consider everyone. Jake felt the weight of betrayal settling in his chest. These were people he worked with daily, shared meals with, trusted with his company's future. The idea that one of them might want him dead was almost incomprehensible. We need to narrow this down, Emily said, her practical nature taking over. Who had the technical expertise to pull this off? Jake studied the list again. Richard and James both have engineering backgrounds. Sarah's tech-savvy, but more on the financial systems side. And motive? Emily pressed. Who stands to gain the most if something happens to you? Richard would be the obvious choice for CEO if I'm gone, Jake admitted. But Catherine would handle the legal succession, and Sarah would have significant influence over the transition. They worked through the list methodically, eliminating those without means or opportunity. Emily's questions were precise, helping Jake see his colleagues in a new light. "So we're down to 3 main suspects," Emily summarized. "Richard Kendrick, Sarah Martinez, and James Wilson." Jake nodded, feeling sick at the thought of any of them being capable of this. These were people he'd trusted, people who'd helped build Westtech into what it was today. "We need to be ready," Emily said, her hand briefly touching his arm. "Whoever did this might realize we're onto them." Jake straightened in his seat, pushing aside his personal feelings. They had a plane full of innocent people to protect. "What's our next move?" Emily's expression was determined as she checked their altitude. "We need to secure the cockpit, and then figure out how to neutralize whatever other surprises they might have planted on this plane." The plane lurched violently, throwing Jake against the control panel. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit as the aircraft dropped several hundred feet in seconds. Emily's knuckles turned white as she gripped the controls, fighting to keep the plane level. "This is worse than before," Jake said through gritted teeth, his combat training kicking in as he scanned the instruments. The altimeter was spinning downward at an alarming rate. "We're losing altitude fast." Emily nodded, her face tight with concentration. "Someone's overriding our controls again. The stabilizers aren't responding properly." Sweat beaded on her forehead as she wrestled with the yoke. The cabin pitched sharply to the left, and screams echoed from the passenger compartment. Jake's stomach churned as he thought about the innocent people behind them, trusting their lives to his and Emily's abilities. "Jake, I need you to focus." Emily's steady voice cut through his rising panic. "Remember your training. What would you do in combat if your systems were compromised?" He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. "Manual override. We need to disconnect the automated systems and fly this thing old school." Together they worked through the emergency procedures, their movements synchronized despite the years apart. Jake's fingers flew over the controls, disabling one system after another while Emily maintained what control she could. "The passengers," Jake said suddenly, guilt washing over him. "They're back there because of me, my company, my enemies." "Stop it!" Emily interrupted sharply. "This isn't helping. I need the focused combat pilot right now, not the guilty CEO." The plane shuddered again, and warning alarms blared through the cockpit. Jake's shoulders tensed as he realized how much responsibility rested on their next decisions. One wrong move could send them plummeting from the sky. Emily initiated another diagnostic scan, her fingers dancing across the touchscreen with practiced efficiency. "Jake, check the fuel gauges. Something's not right." He leaned forward, squinting at the digital readout. "That can't be right. We should have enough fuel for another 4 hours." "The sabotage," Emily said grimly. "They must have tampered with the fuel systems too. We're losing it faster than normal consumption would account for." Jake ran calculations in his head, his heart rate increasing. "How long?" "At this rate?" Emily's voice was tense. "Maybe 40 minutes before we're running on fumes. We need to find somewhere to land, and soon." The responsibility of it all crashed over Jake like a wave. His company, his plane, his people in danger. The weight of leadership had never felt heavier. Emily must have sensed his distress because her hand briefly left the controls to touch his arm. "Hey, stay with me. We've got this. Remember that time in flight school when we lost power over the desert?" "That was different," Jake protested. "It was just us then." "The principles are the same," she insisted, her eyes never leaving the instruments. "We work the problem. We stay focused. We get everyone home safe." Jake nodded, drawing strength from her confidence. She was right. This wasn't the time for self-doubt. He forced himself to compartmentalize, pushing aside his guilt and fear, focusing only on the immediate challenges. Emily continued running diagnostics, her expression growing more concerned with each passing minute. "The fuel leak is getting worse. We need to start looking for alternative landing sites. Major airports would be best, but at this point, I'll take anything with a runway long enough to handle us." The plane lurched again, reminding them that they were still fighting against whatever sabotage had been programmed into the systems. Jake could feel the aircraft's resistance to their commands, like trying to steer a car with failing power steering. "Keep her steady," Emily instructed, her voice calm despite the crisis. "I'm going to try to isolate which systems have been compromised. Maybe we can work around them." Jake pulled out his satellite phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed. Emily monitored the controls beside him, her presence oddly comforting despite their tense situation. "This feels too coordinated," Emily said, glancing at the diagnostic readings. "The fuel system tampering, the override codes, whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "They knew my flight schedule, the plane's specifications, everything." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his gesture. "This isn't just about the flight. Someone's trying to take me out of the picture completely." "Your company," Emily said softly. "What's happening there?" "We've been dealing with aggressive competition lately." Jake's voice was strained as he waited for his call to connect. "Hostile takeover attempts, leaked information, mysterious equipment failures at our facilities." Emily's eyes widened. "You think it's all connected?" "It has to be." Jake started pacing the small space behind the cockpit seats. "Last month our biggest contract fell through because our presentation files were corrupted minutes before the meeting. 2 weeks ago, our main manufacturing plant had an unexplained power failure that cost us millions." "Someone's systematically attacking your business," Emily concluded, her aviation expertise giving her a unique perspective on systematic failures. "And now they're targeting you personally." The phone crackled to life. "Marcus, it's Jake. I need answers now." Marcus's voice came through, tight with concern. "Jake, thank God. We've been trying to reach you. The situation's worse than we thought." Emily adjusted their heading slightly, keeping one ear on Jake's conversation while monitoring their declining fuel levels. "Talk to me, Marcus. What's happening?" Jake demanded, putting the phone on speaker so Emily could hear. 3 more companies in our sector received hostile takeover bids this morning," Marcus reported. "All from shell corporations we can't trace. They're all connected to our supply chain, Jake. Someone's trying to cut us off at the knees." Jake's face paled. "The timing's not a coincidence. Who has access to my travel schedule?" "That's the thing," Marcus replied, his voice grim. "We did a security sweep. Someone's been accessing our servers for months. Flight plans, business strategies, everything. We thought we had good security, but they were 2 steps ahead." Emily gestured for Jake's attention, pointing to a blinking light on the console. "Jake, we just lost another fuel tank. Someone really wants this plane down." Jake gripped the phone tighter. "Marcus, what about the takeover attempts? Any patterns?" "All the offers came through different firms, but we found a connection. They all trace back to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The same place where Richard Werner does his banking," Jake finished, his face hardening. "My old mentor." Emily shot him a questioning look, and Jake explained, "Richard Werner. He taught me everything I know about business. We had a falling out when I refused to sell him my company last year." "Jake," Marcus's voice was urgent. "Werner's been buying up small tech companies for months. But here's what you need to know. He just made a move on Aerotech Industries." Emily's head snapped up. "Aerotech? They manufacture flight control systems." "The same systems that are failing on your plane right now," Marcus confirmed. "Jake, this isn't just corporate sabotage anymore. Werner's trying to destroy everything you've built, and he's willing to go to extreme lengths to do it." Jake leaned against the cockpit wall, the pieces finally falling into place. The systematic attacks on his business, the sabotage of his plane, it was all part of Werner's plan to dismantle his empire piece by piece. He knows if anything happens to me, control of the company goes to the board, Jake said quietly. And Werner's been courting board members for months. Emily checked their fuel gauge again, her expression grim. Well, he picked a hell of a way to try to take you out of the picture. We've got bigger problems right now than corporate takeovers. Marcus, Jake said into the phone, I need you to lock down everything. Board meetings, company accounts, all of it. And get me everything you can on Werner's recent activities. I have a feeling we're going to find more connections to this sabotage. Emily's fingers flew across the cockpit's auxiliary display, her aviation expertise allowing her to repurpose the screen for accessing basic internet connectivity. Jake, I need your company login credentials. If Werner's behind this, there might be a trail. Jake leaned over her shoulder, typing quickly. The familiar scent of her shampoo momentarily distracted him. Lavender, just like in college. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the crisis at hand. There, Emily said, pointing to a series of transactions. Look at these equipment purchases from Aerotech Industries. They're all routed through different shell companies, but the timing matches perfectly with your system failures. Jake squinted at the screen. Those amounts are massive, way more than what we'd need for normal maintenance. Exactly. Emily pulled up another screen, her expression intense. And here's where it gets interesting. Each purchase was followed by a large deposit into an offshore account. The account holder is listed as R.W. Ventures. Richard Werner, Jake muttered, his hands clenching into fists. He's been planning this for months. Emily nodded, continuing to dig deeper into the financial records. The first transaction was dated exactly 1 week after you refused to sell him your company. He's been systematically buying up components that could be used to compromise your aircraft's systems. The plane shuddered, reminding them of their precarious situation. Jake steadied himself against the cockpit wall, while Emily quickly checked their instruments. We're still losing fuel, she reported grimly. But look at this. Every major system failure in your company over the past 6 months correlates with these purchases. The corrupted presentation files, the manufacturing plant power failure. Jake felt sick as he watched Emily trace the web of conspiracy. He was my mentor. I trusted him with everything, my business strategies, my expansion plans. And he used that trust against you, Emily finished softly. She pulled up another screen, showing a complex network of shell companies. See these subsidiaries? They're all connected to Werner's main holding company. He's been positioning them to take over every piece of your business empire once you're out of the picture. The captain, who had been quietly monitoring their situation, spoke up. Ms. Harper, we're getting another warning light on the backup hydraulics. Emily quickly switched screens, her professional demeanor taking over. Implementing countermeasures now. Jake, help me with these calculations. As they worked together to stabilize the aircraft, Jake's mind raced through the implications of their discovery. Werner didn't just want to buy my company. He wanted to destroy it completely, take it apart piece by piece and absorb it into his own corporation. And he was willing to risk everyone on this plane to do it, Emily added, her voice tight with controlled anger. She pulled up another series of documents. Look at these maintenance records. Someone's been tampering with the aircraft's systems for weeks, making small adjustments that wouldn't be noticed during routine checks. Jake leaned closer, reading the data. These modifications, they're all signed off by different technicians, but the work orders originated from the same IP address. An address registered to one of Werner's shell companies, Emily confirmed. She met Jake's eyes, her expression determined. We have enough evidence here to expose him, Jake. But first we need to land this plane, Jake finished. He placed a hand on her shoulder, surprised by how natural the gesture felt after all these years. Emily, I thank you for helping me uncover all this. She gave him a quick smile before turning back to the controls. We're not done yet. Werner's plan might have failed to bring down the plane, but he's still out there, ready to pounce on your company the moment we land. Then we'll be ready for him, Jake said firmly. We have the evidence now. We just need to survive long enough to use it. The plane lurched again, and both of them grabbed for the controls. As they worked in synchronized precision to maintain stability, Jake couldn't help but think how fitting it was that Emily was here with him, helping him fight not just for survival, but for justice. Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. With trembling fingers, he pulled it out, noticing an unknown number. The message made his blood run cold. Back off now, or everything you've built will crumble. Your father would be so disappointed. Jake's face went pale. Only Werner knew about his complicated relationship with his father. He showed the message to Emily, who was monitoring the plane's fuel levels. He's trying to get in your head, she said, her eyes scanning the text. Classic manipulation tactic. Jake slumped into the co-pilot seat, running his hands through his hair. Werner was there when my father died. He promised to look after me, to guide me. His voice cracked slightly. I trusted him with everything, my company's future, my plans. How could I have been so blind? Emily turned from her instruments, her expression softening. Jake, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. You weren't blind. You were human. Werner spent years cultivating your trust, positioning himself as a father figure. That's not on you. Another message buzzed through. Remember the Anderson merger? I made that happen. Without me, you're nothing but a boy playing at being CEO. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Maybe he's right. Maybe I've just been fooling myself all these years. He stared out the cockpit window at the dark clouds surrounding them. Everything I've achieved, what if it was all because of him? That's exactly what he wants you to think, Emily said firmly. She reached over and grabbed his wrist, her touch grounding him. I knew you in college, Jake. Before Werner, before all of this. You were brilliant then, and you're brilliant now. He didn't give you that. The plane shuddered through another patch of turbulence. Jake steadied himself, watching Emily's capable hands adjust the controls. She hadn't changed, still the same steady presence she'd always been. You remember that engineering competition in senior year? Emily asked, not taking her eyes off the instruments. The one where you designed that revolutionary fuel system? Jake nodded slowly. The judges said it was impossible. But you proved them wrong. That was all you, Jake. Werner wasn't there. He didn't design it. He didn't stay up for 3 days straight perfecting the calculations. She glanced at him. That brilliant mind that saw solutions where others saw problems? That's who you are. A third message came through. Last chance, Jake. Walk away now or watch everything burn. Jake stared at the phone, feeling the weight of Werner's threats pressing down on him. But something was different now. Emily's words had sparked something in him, a reminder of who he was before Werner's influence. You're right, he said finally, straightening in his seat. Werner didn't build my company, I did. My team did. He just took advantage of our trust. Emily smiled, that familiar, determined look in her eyes that he remembered from their college days. Now that's the Jake Weston I know. She pulled up the evidence they'd gathered on her screen. We have proof of his manipulation, his sabotage, everything. He's not untouchable. Jake felt his confidence returning, like a slow tide washing away the doubt. We need to get this information to my security team and the authorities as soon as we land. Already working on encrypting and backing up the files, Emily said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Werner might have money and influence, but he's not invincible. We just need to stay focused and see this through. Looking at Emily's determined profile, Jake felt a surge of gratitude. She'd always been his anchor, even back in college. Now here she was again, helping him fight not just for his company, but for his self-worth. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Emily's eyes met his, full of warmth and determination. "Always have, always will. Now, let's show Werner what happens when he underestimates us." The plane lurched violently to the left, throwing Jake against the cockpit wall. Warning lights flashed across the control panel like angry fireflies, each one signaling another system failure. Emily's hands moved expertly across the controls, fighting to keep them level. "We're losing hydraulic pressure in the left wing," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos, "and the backup systems aren't responding." Jake pulled himself back into his seat, scanning the instruments. The altitude indicator was dropping steadily. "Someone's attacking the redundant systems now. They're trying to force us down." Another violent shake rattled the aircraft. Coffee cups crashed to the floor behind them, and distant shouts of fear echoed from the passenger cabin. The captain, who had been monitoring the radio, turned to them with grave eyes. "Air traffic control reports severe weather ahead. With our systems compromised, we can't risk flying through it." Emily wiped sweat from her forehead with her sleeve, her eyes never leaving the controls. "We need to find a clear path. Jake, can you check the weather radar?" He leaned forward, but the screen flickered and went dark. "They're taking out our navigation systems, too. This is getting worse by the minute." Hours of fighting the failing systems had left them both exhausted. Jake could see the fatigue in Emily's face, in the slight tremor of her hands as she adjusted the throttle. Yet she remained focused, determined. It reminded him of their college days, how she'd power through all-night study sessions without complaint. "Emily, you need to take a break," Jake said softly. "You've been at the controls for hours." She shook her head. "I'm fine. We can't risk switching now." The plane dropped suddenly, causing their stomachs to lurch. Emily compensated quickly, but Jake could see the toll it was taking on her. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand over hers on the throttle. "Let me help," he said quietly, "like we used to help each other." Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, a spark of their old connection, strengthened by the shared crisis. Emily nodded, allowing Jake to take partial control. Working together, they managed to stabilize the aircraft temporarily, but the systems continued to fail one by one, each loss making their task more difficult. The strain was wearing on both of them. "Remember that time we flew that old Cessna?" Jake asked, trying to keep their spirits up. "The one with the broken radio?" Emily's lips curved slightly. "You were terrified." "I was not," he protested. "I was appropriately concerned." "You were gripping the yoke so hard your knuckles were white." "Well, you were doing barrel rolls." "Slight exaggeration," she laughed, but the sound was cut short by another system failure alert. Jake watched her handle the new crisis with characteristic grace. The years had only made her more capable, more confident. The feelings he'd buried years ago began to surface, impossible to ignore in the intense intimacy of their shared struggle. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Even after everything, after I let my ambitions get in the way." Emily's hands stilled momentarily on the controls. "Jake, I know this isn't the right time," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "We're fighting for our lives here, but seeing you again, working with you like this, I realize what I gave up, what I lost when I let you go." The plane shuddered again, but this time it felt less significant than the tension hanging between them. Emily remained focused on their flight path, but her voice was soft when she spoke. "I never stopped thinking about you either," she admitted. "But right now we need to focus on surviving this, on stopping Werner before—" Another violent shake interrupted her words. Multiple warning lights began flashing simultaneously, and the aircraft pitched sharply to the right. They were thrown back into crisis mode, their personal revelations forced to wait as they fought to keep the plane in the air. As they worked frantically to stabilize the aircraft, Jake caught Emily's eye once more. The look they shared held both promise and fear, the possibility of reconciliation overshadowed by the very real chance they might not survive to explore it. The plane jerked violently to the left, throwing Jake against the side of his seat. His hands tightened on the controls as warning lights flooded the cockpit in an angry red glow. Sweat trickled down his temple as he fought to keep the aircraft level. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth. The controls felt sluggish under his hands, refusing to respond the way they should. Every correction he made seemed to make things worse. Emily watched the altimeter with growing concern. "We're losing altitude again, 300 feet per minute." Jake's frustration mounted as another system failure alert blared through the cockpit. This was nothing like the combat missions he'd flown. Back then, he'd been younger, more confident. Now, with hundreds of lives depending on him and Emily, the weight of responsibility felt crushing. "I can't," his voice cracked. "I can't get her stabilized." The admission cost him, each word tasting bitter in his mouth. He was supposed to be better than this, a successful CEO, a former combat pilot, yet here he was, failing when it mattered most. The plane shuddered again, and Jake's thoughts spiraled darker. He'd failed at everything that truly mattered, hadn't he? Failed to keep his relationship with Emily. Failed to see the betrayal coming from within his own company. Now he was failing to keep this plane in the air. "Jake." Emily's voice cut through his thoughts. "Look at me." He kept his eyes fixed on the instruments, shame burning in his chest. "I should be handling this better. I'm not the pilot I used to be." "Jake," she repeated, more firmly this time. When he finally met her gaze, her eyes were steady, certain. "You're exactly the pilot you used to be. The same one who flew through a sandstorm to rescue that downed crew in Afghanistan. The same one who never gave up, no matter how impossible things seemed." The memory hit him hard, the howling wind, the zero visibility, the overwhelming odds against success. But he'd done it. They'd all made it home. Emily reached across the space between them, her hand finding his arm. "You're stronger than you think, Jake. You always have been." Her touch was warm, grounding. "And you're not alone this time. We're in this together." The simple contact, the quiet conviction in her voice, broke through his spiral of self-doubt. He drew a deep breath, feeling some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "Together," he repeated softly, the word carrying more meaning than either of them could address in that moment. Emily squeezed his arm gently before returning her hand to the controls. "Now let's show these saboteurs what two stubborn pilots can really do." A ghost of a smile crossed Jake's face as he straightened in his seat. She was right. He wasn't alone, and he wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. With renewed focus, he turned his attention back to the crisis at hand, ready to face whatever came next. The plane continued to buck and shake around them, but now the challenges felt more manageable. Not because they were any less severe, but because he'd remembered something important. Sometimes strength wasn't about carrying the burden alone, but about having someone to share it with. Emily's fingers flew across the tablet screen, her eyes widening as she connected to the plane's satellite network. She'd been digging through company records while Jake monitored the failing systems, and what she found made her stomach turn. "Jake," she called out, her voice tight, "I need you to look at this." He leaned over, still keeping one hand steady on the controls. The screen showed a series of emails between Marcus Chen, Jake's biggest business rival, and someone using an encrypted email address. But it was the attachment that caught his attention, an old photograph from his military days. How did they get this? Jake's jaw clenched. The photo showed him with his old flight crew, including Thomas Reed, a former employee he'd had to fire 3 years ago for ethical violations. Emily pulled up another document. Look at the timestamp. These emails started right after Thomas was terminated from your company. She scrolled through more correspondence. He reached out to Marcus with inside information about your company's vulnerabilities. The plane shuddered, reminding them of their precarious situation. Jake adjusted their heading slightly, trying to compensate for the irregular power fluctuations. Thomas was more than just an employee, Jake admitted, his voice heavy with regret. He was a friend from my Air Force days. When he needed a job, I brought him into the company. He shook his head. But he started making questionable decisions, putting people at risk for profit. I had to let him go. Emily's expression softened. And Marcus Chen saw an opportunity in Thomas's resentment. She pulled up more documents. Look at these transactions. Marcus has been funding Thomas's lifestyle for the past year, in exchange for information about your company's security protocols. Including my flight schedules, Jake added grimly. The betrayal cut deep, especially coming from someone he'd once trusted with his life in combat. The evidence was damning. Thomas had provided Marcus with everything he needed to orchestrate the sabotage, not just to damage Jake's company, but to hurt him personally. The attack on the plane wasn't just business. It was revenge. Emily reached out and squeezed his arm, sensing his distress. Jake, this isn't your fault. You did the right thing letting Thomas go. He made his own choices. I should have seen it coming, Jake muttered, anger and disappointment warring in his voice. I knew Thomas was bitter, but this... He gestured at the failing systems around them. He's willing to risk everyone's lives just to get back at me. The plane lurched again, and warning lights flashed across the console. Emily quickly adjusted the stabilizers, her movements precise despite the tension in the air. When we land, Jake said through gritted teeth, I'm going straight to Marcus's office. This ends now. His free hand clenched into a fist. I have proof of their conspiracy. I can destroy them both. Jake, wait, Emily urged, her tone firm but gentle. Look at our situation. She gestured to the array of warning lights and failing systems. We're barely keeping this plane in the air. We need to focus on landing safely first. The aircraft groaned ominously, emphasizing her point. Jake knew she was right, but the anger still burned hot in his chest. They could have killed everyone on board, Emily. All these innocent people. And we'll make sure they face justice, she assured him. But right now, our priority has to be getting everyone safely on the ground. She met his eyes steadily. We can't help anyone if we don't survive this flight. Jake took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the immediate crisis. Emily was right. Revenge would have to wait. The plane's systems were deteriorating faster than before, and they needed all their concentration to keep it airborne. The plane leveled out momentarily, offering a brief respite from the constant battle against the failing systems. Jake flexed his cramped fingers on the controls, stealing a glance at Emily beside him. The soft glow of the instrument panels cast shadows across her face, reminding him of late-night study sessions in college when they'd pore over flight manuals together. Remember that tiny coffee shop near campus? He asked quietly, breaking the tense silence. The one where we used to practice emergency protocols until closing time? Emily's lips curved into a small smile, her eyes still focused on the readings. Joe's place. He always saved us the corner booth and kept the coffee coming. She adjusted a dial with practiced ease. You were so determined to ace every simulation. You pushed me to be better, Jake admitted. I wouldn't have made it through combat training without those study sessions. The cabin settled into a gentler rhythm, almost peaceful compared to the earlier chaos. Emily finally looked at him, her expression softening. We had good dreams back then. Flying together, maybe starting our own charter service someday. Before I got caught up in the business world, Jake said, regret coloring his voice. Before I started believing that success meant choosing between love and ambition. We were young, Emily offered quietly. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been more patient, if I'd understood your drive better. Jake shook his head. You were right to follow your own path. Look at you now. You're exactly where you're meant to be, doing what you love. The altimeter showed they were maintaining a steady altitude, giving them this precious moment to breathe. Emily checked their fuel levels, her movements automatic after years of experience. I missed this, she confessed. Not the danger, but working together. We always made a good team. The best, Jake agreed. His hand brushed against hers as they both reached for the auxiliary power switch. Neither pulled away immediately. I never told you, Emily started, her voice barely above a whisper. But I followed your success in the news. Every company you built, every milestone. I was proud of you, even when I was still angry. Jake felt something tight in his chest loosen. I thought about you every time I flew, wondering if you were up there somewhere, living your dreams. The moment stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken words and missed opportunities. The gentle hum of the engines provided a backdrop to their shared memories, of late-night flights, shared dreams, and the passion that had brought them together in the first place. Suddenly, the plane jerked violently, shattering their brief peace. Warning lights flashed across the panel as the aircraft pitched sideways. Emily grabbed the controls, her knuckles white with effort. We're losing hydraulic pressure in the left wing, she called out, all traces of nostalgia replaced by urgent focus. Jake immediately checked the emergency systems. Backup power's failing. We need to start our descent now. They moved in perfect synchronization, years of training and shared experience taking over. Emily calculated their optimal descent angle, while Jake coordinated with air traffic control. When the plane bucked against their commands, they compensated together, anticipating each other's moves. Bank right on my mark, Emily directed, her eyes scanning multiple readings at once. We need to redistribute the pressure before we lose more control. Jake followed her lead without hesitation, trusting her expertise. The plane groaned under the strain, but their coordinated efforts kept it stable. As they fought against the increasing turbulence, their earlier connection transformed into something stronger, a partnership forged in crisis, built on mutual trust and respect. The altimeter spun downward as they began their emergency descent, both of them laser-focused on their shared goal of getting everyone safely on the ground. Their personal history, their rediscovered feelings, all of it took a back seat to the immediate demands of survival. Yet somehow, in the midst of the chaos, they'd found their rhythm again, moving as one unit against the growing danger. Jake's hands gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The plane's warning systems blared around them, a cacophony of alerts demanding attention. Emily's fingers danced across the instrument panel, her movements precise despite their dire situation. Ground controls cleared. Runway 3, Emily announced, her voice steady. We've got emergency crews standing by. Jake nodded, focusing on keeping the aircraft level as another shudder ran through the fuselage. Fuel's critically low. We've got one shot at this. The city lights sprawled below them, a glittering carpet in the darkness. Emily adjusted their approach vector, compensating for the failing hydraulics. Taking her down to 3,000 feet. How's our stabilizer holding? Barely, Jake replied, sweat beading on his forehead. Port engine's running hot. We might lose it before touchdown. The plane lurched again, dropping several hundred feet in seconds, Jake and Emily moved in perfect sync, their hands flying over controls and switches. The aircraft groaned in protest as they fought to maintain their descent path. "Flaps at 15, Emily called out. "We're coming in faster than I'd like." Jake's jaw clenched as he watched their airspeed indicator. "Any more flaps and we risk losing what little control we have left." Through the cockpit window, the airport's approach lights blinked into view. Emily's voice remained calm as she communicated with the tower, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. They'd trained for situations like this, but never with so many systems compromised at once. 2,000 feet, Jake announced, fighting the controls as another tremor rocked the plane. "Landing gear?" Emily pulled the lever. Nothing happened. She tried again, her composure slipping slightly. "Gear's not responding. Switching to manual override." The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over their faces as they worked. Jake could hear the passengers murmuring behind the cockpit door, their fear palpable even through the barrier. The responsibility of their lives weighed heavily on his shoulders. 1,000 feet, Emily said, her eyes darting between instruments. "Gear's down but not locked. We'll have to chance it." The runway approached rapidly, its lights piercing through the darkness. Jake's combat training kicked in, pushing aside exhaustion and doubt. Every muscle in his body tensed as he prepared for the landing. 500 feet, he called out. "Engine 2's failing." Emily's hand briefly touched his arm. "We've got this, Jake. Just like old times." The plane shuddered violently as the second engine sputtered. Warning klaxons screamed through the cockpit. Jake fought to maintain their approach angle, his arms straining against the controls. 200 feet, Emily announced. "Brace for impact." The runway rushed up to meet them. Jake pulled back on the yoke, trying to bleed off speed without losing control. Emily worked the remaining engine, attempting to level their descent. "Now!" Jake shouted. The wheels touched down hard, the impact jarring through the entire aircraft. Metal screamed against tarmac as they fought to keep the plane straight. Emergency vehicles raced alongside them, their lights flashing in the darkness. The aircraft shuddered and skidded, but slowly, gradually, their speed decreased. Jake and Emily remained focused, working in tandem until finally, mercifully, the plane rolled to a stop on the runway. For a moment, neither of them moved. The sudden silence was deafening after the chaos of their descent. Jake's hands trembled as he released the controls, the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Emily slumped back in her seat, taking her first deep breath in what felt like hours. "We did it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Jake turned to look at her, seeing his own relief mirrored in her eyes. They'd survived the landing, but both knew this was just the beginning. Someone had tried to bring down his plane, and they still didn't know the full extent of the threat. Emergency vehicles surrounded them now, their lights painting the cockpit in alternating red and blue. The immediate danger had passed, but the mystery of who was behind the sabotage remained. The emergency exit door swung open with a hiss, letting in a blast of cool night air. Jake stepped onto the metal stairs, his legs slightly unsteady after the intense landing. Emergency vehicles' lights painted everything in alternating flashes of red and blue, creating an almost surreal atmosphere on the tarmac. Emily emerged behind him, her uniform wrinkled, but her posture still professional. "Airport security's waiting to debrief us," she said softly, close enough that only he could hear. "And there's a team ready to inspect the sabotage device." Jake nodded, his mind already racing ahead to his next move. As they descended the stairs, he pulled out his phone and dialed his head of security. "Thomas, I need you to set up a meeting with Marcus Chen. Tonight." He paused, listening. "I don't care what time it is. Tell him if he doesn't meet me, the FBI will be very interested in what we found on this plane." Emergency responders swarmed around them, checking passengers and crew for injuries. The airport terminal glowed in the distance, a handful of reporters already gathering at the perimeter. Jake guided Emily away from the cameras, toward a private security entrance. "You're really going to confront Chen?" Emily asked, keeping pace with his long strides. "After what just happened?" "This ends tonight," Jake replied, his voice hard. "Chen's been trying to take over my company for months. The sabotage, the hostile takeover attempts, it all leads back to him." They entered the terminal through a side door, where airport security and several FBI agents were waiting. The next hour passed in a blur of statements and preliminary reports. Jake answered their questions mechanically, his mind focused on the upcoming confrontation. Finally, his phone buzzed. Thomas had arranged the meeting at a private lounge in the airport's executive terminal. As Jake stood to leave, Emily caught his arm. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. It wasn't a request. Jake started to protest, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. She'd proven herself more than capable during the crisis, and truthfully, he wanted her there. "All right," he conceded, "but stay alert. Chen's dangerous when he's cornered." They made their way through the quiet terminal, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Security cameras tracked their progress, and Jake noticed several plainclothes officers discreetly positioned along their route. Thomas was thorough, at least. The executive lounge was dimly lit, all leather and dark wood. Marcus Chen sat at a corner table, looking irritatingly composed in his tailored suit. 2 bodyguards flanked him, their stances rigid. "Jake," Chen smiled, gesturing to the empty chairs. "And who's your lovely companion?" "Cut the act, Marcus," Jake growled, remaining standing. "We found your sabotage device. We have proof you tried to bring down my plane." Chen's smile didn't waver. "Proof? I seriously doubt that. Besides, if I wanted to destroy you, there are much easier ways." "Like trying to steal my company?" Jake demanded. "Those hostile takeover attempts weren't exactly subtle." "You really don't get it, do you?" Chen leaned forward, his smile fading. "The takeover attempts, the sabotage, they're just distractions. The real threat's been right under your nose this whole time." Emily tensed beside Jake. "What are you talking about?" Chen's eyes glittered in the dim light. "Why don't you ask your board members about Project Phoenix? Or better yet, ask Thomas what happened to those missing research files from last quarter." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Project Phoenix was supposed to be his company's most closely guarded secret, a revolutionary new technology that would transform the aerospace industry. "How do you know about that?" "Because, Jake," Chen said softly, "someone very close to you has been feeding me information for months. The sabotage? It was meant to fail. We needed you distracted while the real operation unfolded." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If Chen knew about Project Phoenix, if he had access to the missing files. "Who?" he demanded. "Who's the mole?" Chen stood, adjusting his cuffs. "That's for you to figure out, but I'd start with the people you trust most." He nodded to his bodyguards, who moved towards the door. "Good luck, Jake. You're going to need it." Jake stood frozen, his mind racing through possibilities. The sabotage, the takeover attempts, Project Phoenix. It was all connected, but the true conspiracy ran deeper than he'd imagined. Someone in his inner circle, someone he trusted, had betrayed him. Emily touched his arm gently, bringing him back to the present. "Jake," she said quietly, "what exactly is Project Phoenix?" Jake ran his hands through his hair, pacing the executive lounge after Chen's departure. The elegant room felt suffocating now, its luxury a mockery of the turmoil churning inside him. "Project Phoenix," he said finally, turning to Emily, "is a revolutionary aerospace navigation system. It would change everything: commercial flights, military operations, Space exploration. We've been developing it in secret for the past 2 years. Emily leaned against one of the leather chairs, her expression thoughtful. And someone's been leaking information about it? Not just leaking, Jake said, his voice tight. The files that went missing. They contained the core algorithms, the breakthrough that makes the whole system work. If Chen has those... He trailed off, the implications too devastating to voice. Start from the beginning, Emily urged. When did the files disappear? Jake closed his eyes, thinking back. 3 months ago, right after our quarterly board meeting. Only 5 people had access to those files. Me, Thomas, my CFO, Sarah from R&D, Marcus from legal, and... He stopped, abruptly, something clicking into place. And? Emily prompted. David Chen, Marcus's brother. Jake's face darkened. He joined the company 6 months ago as our head of cybersecurity. Thomas recommended him highly. Emily straightened. Thomas, your CFO? The same Thomas who arranged this meeting with Chen? Yes, and the same Thomas who's been handling all our merger negotiations. Jake's mind was racing now, connecting dots he should have seen months ago. He's been pushing for a partnership with Chen's company, saying it would help us weather the hostile takeover attempts. Attempts that Chen just admitted were distractions, Emily added, her aviation expertise lending a different perspective. The sabotage today, it was sophisticated but ultimately containable, almost like it was designed to fail, Jake finished, to keep us focused on the immediate threat while something bigger was happening behind the scenes. Emily moved closer, her presence steadying. What else has Thomas had access to? Everything, Jake admitted, the weight of his trust in Thomas now feeling like lead in his stomach. Financial records, security protocols, Project Phoenix? He stopped, a new realization hitting him. The board meeting next week. We're supposed to unveil the final phase of Project Phoenix. Which would be the perfect time for Chen to reveal he already has the technology, Emily said softly. Your company's stock would plummet. You'd be forced to sell. Jake sank into a chair, the magnitude of the betrayal threatening to overwhelm him. Thomas had been with him from the beginning, helping build the company from nothing. They'd celebrated successes together, weathered failures together. The idea that it had all been a long con. I've been such a fool, he muttered. Emily knelt beside his chair, her hand finding his. No, you've been human. Trust isn't a weakness, Jake, but now we know what we're dealing with. He looked at her, seeing the same determination that had helped save the plane earlier. You don't have to get involved in this mess. I'm already involved, she said firmly. Besides, you're going to need someone you can trust, someone who isn't tied to your company or Chen's games. The truth of her words hit home. In the span of 1 day, his world had been turned upside down, first by the sabotage attempt, then by Emily's unexpected presence, and now by this revelation of betrayal. But somehow, having her here made it feel manageable. Okay, he said, squeezing her hand. Where do we start? We gather evidence, Emily replied. Carefully, quietly. If Thomas is really working with Chen, we need proof before we make any moves. Jake nodded, feeling some of his equilibrium return. The betrayal still hurt, but Emily's pragmatic approach gave him something to focus on beyond the pain. Together they could unravel this conspiracy. Together they could save everything he'd worked for. Thank you, he said softly. For being here, for helping. Emily's eyes met his, warm and determined. We're in this together now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it as a team. Jake's private office hummed with tension as he and Emily hunched over his laptop, sifting through years of financial records. The city lights twinkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a stark contrast to the darkness they were uncovering within the company's files. Look at this, Emily said, pointing to a series of transactions. These payments to offshore accounts. They're all routed through shell companies, but the timing matches perfectly with your board meetings. Jake leaned closer, his shoulder brushing against hers. Every time we made progress on Project Phoenix, there was a corresponding transfer. He pulled up another window, cross-referencing the dates. And each transfer was authorized by Thomas. Emily grabbed a legal pad, her aviation training showing in her methodical approach. So we have the money trail. What about the technical side? David Chen's security protocols, Jake muttered, typing rapidly. He insisted on implementing new cybersecurity measures 6 months ago, said it would better protect our intellectual property. He laughed bitterly. Instead, it gave them a backdoor into everything. Can you prove it? Jake nodded, pulling up logs of system access. Every time someone accesses our servers, it leaves a trace, even if they try to hide it. His fingers flew over the keyboard. Here, late-night access to Project Phoenix files using Thomas's credentials but from an IP address registered to Chen Industries. Emily started organizing their findings into clear, categorical evidence. We need to document everything. Bank records, server logs, communication trails, anything that shows the connection between Thomas, David, and Chen Industries. Wait, Jake said suddenly, remembering something. The plane's black box data. He turned to Emily. Could that prove the sabotage was intentional? Better than that, Emily replied, her eyes lighting up. The flight data recorder would show exactly how the systems were compromised, if we can prove it was done using David's security protocols. It connects everything, Jake finished. The attempted sabotage, the stolen technology, the financial fraud. It all points to a coordinated effort between Thomas and Chen. They worked through the night, building their case piece by piece. Emily's attention to detail complemented Jake's deep knowledge of his company's operations. Together, they constructed a timeline that left no room for doubt. We should contact the FBI, Emily suggested, stretching after hours of intensive work. This goes beyond corporate espionage. They attempted to bring down an aircraft. Jake nodded, but his expression was troubled. We need to time this perfectly. If we move too soon, they could destroy evidence. Too late, and they'll have already announced their stolen version of Project Phoenix. The board meeting, Emily said. That's our window. They're planning to make their move there, so we make ours first. She picked up the thick file of evidence they'd compiled. We present this to the FBI tomorrow morning, give them time to verify everything, then have them ready to move during the meeting. Jake stood and walked to the windows, staring out at the city he'd helped build. I trusted Thomas with everything, he said quietly. Gave him a chance when no one else would, made him wealthy beyond his dreams, and all this time. Emily joined him at the window, her presence reassuring. You built something amazing here, Jake. Something worth protecting. Don't let their betrayal make you doubt yourself. He turned to her, seeing the same determination that had helped save the plane reflected in her eyes. I couldn't have done this without you. Not just today, finding all this evidence, but surviving the sabotage, keeping me focused when everything was falling apart. We make a good team, she said simply. We always did. Jake gathered their evidence into his secure briefcase, each document another nail in the conspirator's coffin. First thing tomorrow, we take this to the FBI. Then we prepare for the board meeting. He checked his watch. We have 36 hours to save everything I've built. Emily picked up her jacket, her expression resolute. Then we better make every hour count. The authorities will need time to verify everything and put their teams in place. Together, they made final preparations to present their findings, knowing that the next day would change not just the fate of Jake's company, but their lives as well. Camera flashes erupted like lightning as Jake stepped up to the podium in the grand ballroom of the Weston Tower. Dozens of reporters filled the rows of chairs, their devices ready to capture every word. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that only came before earth-shattering revelations. Emily stood just off to the side, her presence a steady anchor in the storm. She wore a crisp navy suit that matched Jake's, a united front in both appearance and purpose. Their eyes met briefly, and he drew strength from her subtle nod. "Good morning," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the speakers. 3 days ago, my private jet was sabotaged in an attempt to not only destroy my company, but to end my life. Today, I'm here to reveal the truth behind that incident and a conspiracy that goes far deeper than anyone could have imagined. The room fell silent, save for the rapid clicking of cameras. Jake gestured to the large screen behind him, where financial records began to appear. Thomas Bedford, my former CFO, and David Chen of Chen Industries orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal proprietary technology, manipulate market positions, and ultimately attempt to take control of Weston Enterprises through criminal means. Gasps rippled through the audience as Jake methodically presented the evidence. Bank transfers flashed across the screen, followed by server logs and communication records. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the conspirator's coffin. "The FBI has already taken both men into custody, along with several accomplices," Jake continued, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Their attempt to sabotage my aircraft was not just corporate espionage, it was attempted murder." He paused, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. A reporter's hand shot up, and Jake nodded in acknowledgement. "Mr. Weston, how did you uncover this conspiracy?" Jake's eyes found Emily again. "I had help from someone who represents the best of what aviation expertise and human integrity can offer. Emily Harper, a senior aviation specialist, not only helped save the aircraft but was instrumental in uncovering the truth." Emily stepped forward, her professional demeanor masking the emotion Jake could see in her eyes. Together they detailed the technical aspects of the investigation, how they'd traced the sabotage through David's compromised security protocols, how they'd connected the financial trails to offshore accounts. "Ms. Harper," another reporter called out, "can you explain how you managed to land the compromised aircraft?" Emily leaned toward the microphone. "The situation required both technical knowledge and combat flight experience. Fortunately, Mr. Weston's background as a former combat pilot proved invaluable. We worked as a team to overcome the sabotaged systems and ensure the safety of everyone on board." The questions continued, and Jake found himself drawing strength from Emily's presence. She filled in technical details when needed, her expertise adding credibility to their narrative. The reporters seemed particularly interested in their collaborative effort to save both the plane and the company. "Mr. Weston, what does this mean for the future of Weston Enterprises?" Jake straightened his shoulders. "This experience has taught me valuable lessons about trust, vigilance, and the importance of having the right people by your side. Weston Enterprises will emerge stronger, with improved security measures and a renewed commitment to innovation and integrity." As the press conference continued, Jake noticed something shift in the room. The initial shock had given way to admiration, not just for the exposure of the conspiracy, but for the resilience shown in facing it. The reporter's questions became less accusatory and more forward-looking, focusing on the company's future rather than its near downfall. Emily stepped closer to Jake as he wrapped up the conference, their shoulders nearly touching. The gesture wasn't lost on the photographers, who captured the moment of solidarity. Here they stood, the businessman and the aviation expert, united by crisis and strengthened by trust. Looking at the sea of faces before him, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the outcome of their investigation, but for the woman standing beside him. Emily had been more than a co-pilot in their moment of crisis. She had been his partner, his conscience, and his strength. Without her expertise, her determination, and her unwavering support, none of this would have been possible. Jake stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, watching the city buzz below. The morning sun caught the edges of neighboring skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the street. In his hand, he held a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. "The Thompson deal is ready for your signature," Emily said, entering his office with a stack of papers. She'd taken to helping him reorganize the company, her analytical mind proving just as valuable in the boardroom as it had been in the cockpit. He turned, taking in her professional appearance, a cream-colored blazer over a navy dress. "Thanks. Their security protocols check out?" "Triple-checked myself." Emily set the papers on his desk and joined him at the window. "The new system flagged nothing suspicious. They're clean." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of recent events in every business decision. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and strategic planning sessions. Every partnership required extra scrutiny now, but Emily's presence made the task less daunting. "The board seems impressed with the new security measures," he said, finally setting down his cold coffee. "Your aviation expertise translated surprisingly well to corporate defense strategies." Emily smiled, crossing her arms. "Protecting planes or protecting companies, it's all about identifying vulnerabilities and creating fail-safes. Besides, after what we went through, I'd say we're experts at spotting trouble." Jake moved to his desk, picking up the Thompson contract. "Speaking of trouble, how's the aviation consulting going?" "Growing faster than expected." Emily perched on the edge of his desk, a habit she'd developed during their late-night strategy sessions. 3 more airlines requested safety audits this week. They're all worried about similar sabotage attempts." "You should consider expanding," Jake said, signing the contract with practiced efficiency. "Maybe even start your own firm." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Are you trying to get rid of me, Mr. Weston?" "Actually," Jake set down his pen, meeting her eyes. "I was thinking more along the lines of a partnership. Weston Enterprises could use a dedicated aviation security division, and you're the best in the field." The proposition hung in the air between them. Emily straightened, her expression turning thoughtful. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Jake stood, moving around the desk to face her directly. "What we did together, saving the plane, uncovering the conspiracy, rebuilding trust in the company. It worked because we balanced each other out. You see things I miss, and I can help scale your expertise to help more people." Emily uncrossed her arms, her professional demeanor softening. "It would be more than just business, wouldn't it?" "Everything with us has always been more than just business," Jake admitted. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "That day on the plane, when I saw you in the cockpit, I realized how much I'd missed having you in my life. Not just as a colleague or a friend, but as a partner," Emily finished, squeezing his hand. "Exactly." Jake smiled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "We could build something amazing together, Emily. Something that combines your aviation expertise with my business experience. Something that makes a real difference." Emily stood, their hands still linked. "I assume you already have a proposal drafted?" Jake laughed, reaching for a folder on his desk with his free hand. "Know me that well, do you?" "Well enough to know you never make a move without a plan." She took the folder, but didn't open it. "And well enough to know that this isn't just about business." "No," Jake agreed softly. "It's not." They stood there, the morning sun warming the office around them, the city humming with life below. The folder containing their potential future rested between them, unopened but full of promise. "We'll need to take things slow," Emily said finally, "both professionally and personally. Build a solid foundation." Jake nodded, understanding completely. "One step at a time. We'll do this right." Emily smiled, setting the folder back on the desk. "Then yes, Jake Weston, I'll build something with you." The city lights twinkled below Jake's penthouse balcony as he arranged the last of the wine glasses on the outdoor table. The late summer evening brought a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the potted jasmine plants Emily had helped him select last week. He checked his watch. She would arrive any minute. The past few weeks had been intense, filled with business meetings and reorganizing the company. But tonight wasn't about business. Tonight was about them. The elevator dinged, and Jake turned to see Emily stepping out, wearing a simple black dress that made his heart skip a beat. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, catching the golden light of the setting sun. "This is quite a setup," she said, taking in the intimate table setting and the soft music playing in the background. "Should I be worried you're trying to negotiate another business deal?" Jake laughed, pulling out a chair for her. "No contracts tonight, I promise." Emily sat down, and Jake poured them each a glass of wine. The bottle was from the same vineyard they'd visited during their college days, a detail that didn't escape her notice. "You remembered," she said softly, running her finger along the bottle's label. "I remember everything about those days," Jake admitted, taking his seat across from her, "including how you used to say this wine tasted like liquid sunshine." Emily took a sip, closing her eyes for a moment. "It still does." The chef Jake had hired served their dinner, a recreation of their first date meal from their favorite college restaurant. As they ate, they talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing as naturally as it had back then. "Do you remember that horrible campus coffee shop?" Emily asked, laughing. "The one where we used to study until midnight?" "The bean scene," Jake nodded, grinning, "where the coffee tasted like motor oil, but we didn't care because we were too busy planning our futures." "You were going to conquer the business world," Emily remembered, her eyes soft with nostalgia. "And I was determined to fly." "Looks like we both made it," Jake said, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Just took a different path than we expected." Emily turned her hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. "That day on the plane, when I saw you walk into the cockpit, it was like all those years apart disappeared. And then reappeared very quickly when we started arguing about the best way to handle the situation," Jake added with a chuckle. "Well, you were being stubborn. I prefer to call it determined." They shared a laugh, and Jake stood up, holding out his hand. "Dance with me?" Emily took his hand, letting him pull her close as a slow song filled the air. They swayed together, the city lights creating a backdrop of twinkling stars behind them. "I've missed this," Emily murmured against his shoulder. "Missed us." Jake's arms tightened around her waist. "I tried to forget," he admitted. "Threw myself into building the company, convinced myself that success was enough. But seeing you again—" Emily pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "What changed?" "Everything." Jake reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "When we were up there, fighting to keep the plane in the air, all I could think about was how much time we'd wasted. How many years I'd spent trying to prove myself, when what I really wanted was right in front of me all along." They had stopped dancing now, standing still under the starlit sky. Emily's hand rested on his chest, right over his heart. "Emily." Jake's voice was soft but certain. "I never stopped loving you. Even when we were apart, even when I thought I'd moved on. You were always there, in every decision, every milestone. I'd find myself wondering what you'd think, what you'd say. And now that you're back in my life—" His words trailed off as Emily reached up, placing her finger against his lips. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. The confession hung in the air between them, a truth finally spoken after so many years of silence. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jake's office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Emily stood by the window, coffee cup in hand, watching the city come to life below. Jake sat at his desk, finalizing some paperwork, but his attention kept drifting to her. "You know," Emily said, turning to face him, "when I took that co-pilot position, I never imagined it would lead to this." Jake set down his pen and smiled. "Life has a funny way of bringing people back together." Speaking of which, Emily walked over to his desk, setting down her coffee cup. "I got a call from the airline this morning. They're offering me a position as head of aviation safety consulting." Jake's eyes lit up. "Emily, that's fantastic. You've earned it after everything that happened." "There's more," she continued, perching on the edge of his desk. "They want me to work with private aviation companies to improve their security protocols, including yours." Jake leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Are you suggesting we become business partners as well as personal ones?" "Why not?" Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "After what we went through, we know firsthand how important aviation security is. And working together—" She reached for his hand. "Well, we've already proven we make a pretty good team." Jake stood up, pulling her into his arms. "We do, don't we? Even when we're arguing about the best way to handle turbulence." "Especially then," Emily laughed, then grew serious. "But Jake, are you sure you want to mix business with pleasure? After everything that happened with the sabotage?" "I trust you," Jake said simply. "More than anyone else in my life. You've seen me at my worst, stressed, scared, doubting myself, and you still stood by me. That means everything." Emily wrapped her arms around his neck. "Well, when you put it that way." Their moment was interrupted by Jake's assistant knocking on the door. "Mr. Weston, your 10 o'clock is here." "Back to reality," Emily sighed, stepping back. "Not for long," Jake smiled. "We have that flight to catch this afternoon." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You still haven't told me where we're going." "Let's just say I'm taking you back to where it all began." Jake's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Pack something nice for dinner." Later that day, they walked through the airport terminal together, their fingers intertwined. It felt different from all the other times they'd been here. No emergencies, no crisis to manage, just the two of them starting a new adventure. "You know," Emily said, squeezing his hand, "I used to dream about moments like this. During all those years apart, I'd see couples in airports and wonder if we'd ever get another chance." Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "I did too. Every time I flew, I'd look for you in the cockpit, hoping maybe fate would bring us together again. Instead, it took a sabotaged plane and a crisis," Emily chuckled. "Hey, whatever works," Jake grinned, then grew serious. "But you know what I realized through all of this? Sometimes the biggest risks aren't the ones we take in business or even in the air. They're the ones we take with our hearts." Emily reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "Well, Mr. Weston, I'd say this particular risk is paying off pretty well." They continued walking through the terminal, their carry-on bags rolling behind them. The airport buzzed with its usual energy, people rushing to catch flights, emotional reunions at arrival gates, tearful goodbyes at security checkpoints. But for Jake and Emily, it felt like a beginning. The airline staff recognized them, offering subtle nods of respect as they passed. After all, their story had made headlines: the billionaire CEO and the aviation expert who saved a plane and exposed a corporate conspiracy. But that wasn't the story that mattered to them now. What mattered was the way their hands fit perfectly together, the shared glances that spoke volumes without words, and the promise of all the adventures yet to come. They had already faced the worst together: turbulence, betrayal, near disaster. Now it was time for the best parts, building a future, one day at a time. Jake stood at the window of his penthouse office, gazing at the city skyline as the sun painted the glass buildings in shades of gold. The past few months had transformed his life in ways he never could have imagined. His company was thriving, stronger than ever after weathering the storm of betrayal and sabotage. But more importantly, Emily was back in his life, filling a void he hadn't even realized was there. A gentle knock at the door drew his attention. Emily walked in, looking professional, yet radiant in her navy blazer and pencil skirt. "The Aviation Safety Board just approved our new security protocols," she announced, her face glowing with pride. "Every private jet in our fleet will be equipped with the new system by the end of the month." Jake crossed the room to meet her, pulling her into a warm embrace. "I knew you could do it. You've revolutionized our entire safety department in just 3 months." "We did it together," Emily corrected him, smoothing his tie. "Your trust in me meant everything. Not many CEOs would hand over complete control of their aviation security to someone else." "You're not just someone else," Jake said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're the person who saved my life, my company, and my heart." Emily's cheeks flushed at his words. "Speaking of the company, the quarterly reports are in. Our stock has risen 15% since we implemented the new safety measures. Investors are impressed with our commitment to security." "They should be," Jake replied, leading her to the sitting area, where they often held their informal meetings. "But I'm more impressed with how seamlessly you've integrated into the corporate world. Remember how nervous you were about leaving the cockpit?" Emily laughed, settling onto the leather sofa. "I still miss flying sometimes, but this feels right. Using my experience to protect others, working alongside you." She paused, her expression thoughtful. "It's like everything in my life was leading to this moment." Jake sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How every decision we made, even the ones that hurt at the time, brought us here. Like when I chose aviation over our relationship in college?" Emily's voice held a trace of old regret. "Exactly," Jake nodded. "If you hadn't followed your passion, you wouldn't have been on that plane when I needed you most, and I wouldn't have learned what really matters in life." Emily leaned against him, their fingers still intertwined. "And what matters most to you now, Mr. Weston?" "This," he said simply, "having someone who understands both sides of me, the businessman and the pilot. Someone who challenges me to be better, but accepts me as I am." The city lights began twinkling outside as dusk settled over the skyline. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on their journey. "The board wants us to present at the International Aviation Safety Conference next month," Emily mentioned, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "They think our story could inspire other companies to prioritize security." "Our story," Jake repeated thoughtfully. "It's quite something, isn't it? From college sweethearts to strangers to partners in every sense of the word." Emily stood up and walked to the window, Jake following close behind. Below them, the city pulsed with energy, countless lives intersecting and diverging. But up here, in their shared space, everything felt clear and certain. "You know what I love most about our story?" Emily turned to face him, her expression soft. "That we both had to become exactly who we were meant to be before we could find our way back to each other." Jake wrapped his arms around her waist, drawing her close. "And now that we have? Now we build something even better," Emily smiled, resting her head against his chest. "Together." The setting sun cast long shadows across the office, but neither of them moved to turn on the lights. They stood there, holding each other, two people who had faced crisis and came out stronger. Their professional success was undeniable, their personal happiness evident in every shared glance and gentle touch. But most importantly, they had found their way back to each other, creating a partnership that was both tender and resilient.